What's up? In this video I want to help you to find the right drone for you. It's the end of June 2022 right now, and I don't expect any major changes in the drone market over the next 6 to 12 months, so that should be a good timing. And I separated this video in multiple parts, so I will first talk about each individual drone. I will mention the specs and also my opinion about each drone, which is mostly based about actual experience, because most of these drones actually flew them for quite a long time. And after that I will give you my recommendations for the entry level, the mid range and the professional market, so you know exactly what to buy there. And you will find all these sections in the timeline below, so you can just choose whatever is interesting for you and save a bit of time watching this video. There are also a few drones that I will not talk about in this video. These are mainly the high-end drones such as the Inspire 2 and the Sony Airpeak and so on, because people that are in the market for these drones know already what they want, so I won't have to mention that here. And drones within the same budgets that I won't mention here are likely outperformed already by one of the drones that I mention here, so just forget about it. But before we start, there are also a few things that I want to mention here that are important to understand why I have a certain opinion about each drone, so let's start with that. The first point here is signal strength, and there's always the kilometer number, which does not mean that you should actually fly that far away or that you can, but it is a good indication of how stable your connection is within the range that you would usually fly a drone, which is generally line of sight, but in certain countries, or if you don't care about it, also sometimes a few kilometers. But I would personally never fly farther than 3 kilometers because it's unnecessary and it greatly increases the risk of crashing or causing some other issues, so don't do that. And then there's also functionality called APAS on DJI drones, which is environmental sensing, where it flies around objects by itself. And I personally would never use it and not recommend using it, because the footage that's coming out of that, even with the newer drones like the Mavic 3 or so, it's never smooth. Like sometimes it flies like quite steady, but then suddenly it goes around something, so it keeps standing in the air for a moment, then it flies around it, and then it flies a bit faster and slower again and so on. Like it never really looks good, so I don't use it, and I will not talk about APAS any further. It just sucks on all drones in my opinion. Then we will also talk about prices for each drone, and there we'll just use the prices that I find on Amazon. You will always be able to find some special offers in your local store, some other websites also, but this is changing all the time, so I can't mention those prices here. That's why I want to keep it consistent with the current Amazon prices. And also talking about Autel drones, here I will mention the Nano Plus in this video, but I never used any more expensive drones from this manufacturer, so I can't say anything about it. But generally these drones have the advantage that they have less flight restrictions than DJI drones. In that case, I would just look for an Autel drone within the price range that you're looking for and watch some reviews if the video quality is good enough for you. I think generally yes, they are not bad, but I don't have any experience about that here, so I don't want to talk about that. And there are also a few features of each drone that you might not know about as a beginner. This is mainly H.264, H.265 codec and 10-bit, and that basically means that H.264 is the older codec, which is not bad, but it's like not that modern anymore. There's the newer codec, which is called H.265 or HEVC on some drones. It's both the same, and it has a better compression. So let's say you record in 100 Mbits, then it essentially means that you get a better quality with H.265 than H.264, because it can cram more information in the same container, just better compression there. And then there's also 10-bit, which means that you have 4 times the color information. This is nothing that you actually see straight out of camera. This is more when you want to color grade your footage, that you can push the colors a bit further without breaking the image. So if you want to color grade, 10-bit is important, otherwise not. And aside from that, if you want to support my channel, you will find the Amazon links to all of those drones in the description below. I get a small commission when you buy through those links, but you don't pay anything extra, so that's a good way to support that. But I would say it's finally time to talk about each drone. Okay, let's start with the DJI Mini SE, and this is also the only drone that I've never used by myself, and I also don't have it here. So I watched some reviews before to build an opinion about this drone, and I would say let's start with the specs, which is the price at first. It costs $289 currently at Amazon. I could not find a Fly More combo for it, but you can buy additional batteries and a charging hub, etc., and I would actually recommend doing so. Then it weighs 249 grams, which is great. It has a 2.7K resolution or 12 megapixels with maximum 30 frames per second, which is okay, but the big downside comes now, and that is 40 megabits only in H.264. This is actually quite low. And also sensors, it does not have any sensors aside from downward sensors, which are only there for landing, so there's no protection when you fly it around. It will not stop, you will straight crash into a tree or something if you don't see it. There are also no smart features like object tracking or so on, and the flight time is 30 minutes. Flight time is not bad, like usually you don't get actually 30 minutes. I would probably say somewhere 23, 25, something like that should be realistic from my experience with other DJI drones. Just not bad, it's quite standard there. And talking about my opinion about this drone based on the reviews that I watched is that I was actually surprised when I saw the footage. It looked better than I thought, but because of that 40 Mbits limit in H.264, you can't really do much with the footage. So I would say it's enough to just include the footage into some daily vlogs or whatever you want to do with it. But if you want to do some more fancy color grading or stuff like that, then this is definitely not the right drone that you want to get. But I think especially if you just want to get into drones and you don't know if you want to stick with it, then it could actually be a good entry-level drone because of the price tag. I mean, $289, such cheap drones were not available when I started out, and that's definitely good to get into. And it also leads us to the next drone, which is also a 249 gram drone, the DJI Mini 2, which I have here. Also didn't flew it that much, only a few times in one day, and I edited the footage of it, so I have a bit more experience with this drone. So let's also go through the specs, and this drone comes at $425 single or $549 for the Fly More combo, which is actually really good. And the big difference to the Mini SE is that it can actually shoot up to 4K resolution in 30 frames per second or in 1080p with 60 frames per second and 2.7K as well, which is actually quite good. And the bitrate is also a lot stronger with 100 Mbits in H.264, so nothing impressive, but it is quite the standard that also many bigger cameras had. Sensors, same as the Mini SE, only bottom sensors, so only for landing, no protection. Smart features, it has quick shots, but I would say be really careful when you use them because there is no obstacle avoidance, no sensors, so the drone doesn't really know where it's flying, and if you use it close to some trees or stuff like that, it might end up in there when you do a quick shot, so careful. So let's also talk about my experience with the Mini 2. As mentioned, I only flew it a few times within one day, so it's not like an extensive experience, but I was actually surprised by the picture quality or the video quality because I didn't expect much from such a small drone, at least before the Mini 3 came out. And I was also able to color grade it at least a bit. Like, of course, you can't go crazy with color grading on this drone, but as long as it stays within a normal range, it's totally fine. So I actually think that for the price of $425 or $549 for the Fly More combo, it's actually a really good drone for travelers if you want to save some money. But I must also say that aside from the price and weight, there's nothing really that makes this drone outstanding. So I would really only get it if you can't afford anything more, you can't save any more money, you don't have time because you're going traveling or so on. Then yes, get it. But otherwise, I would rather get one of the drones that you will come next to. And the next drone on my list is the Autel Nano Plus, this little orange thing here. Let's also quickly go through the specs. The price is $949 on Amazon, $1,049 for the premium combo where you get the bag and multiple batteries and stuff like that. And the camera is a bit bigger than the others. It's a 0.8 inch sensor, which is good. And it also supports H.264 and H.265 codecs. So this is the first drone here that has the H.265, which is much better. And it supports up to 100 Mbits also in H.265, so the footage here is already on a better level. It also has a log profile, but I would not suggest using log here because log profiles, you should only use that with 10-bit, so don't do that on this drone. Then it also features a resolution of 4K and up to 50 megapixels actually, because it uses a quad Bayer sensor. It's good for photography. And frame rates, it has 4K 30 or Full HD up to 60 frames per second. Here it's actually quite nice. It also supports HDR video to up to 60 frames per second. In comparison to the Mini 3, this drone can only do HDR up to 30 frames per second, and it does that automatically. On the Nano Plus, you can control if you want to have the HDR effect or not, always in every resolution, so that's pretty nice. And this is also the first drone here that has obstacle avoidance sensors on the front and the back and the bottom as well. So that's actually a huge step up from the Mini 2 and and Mini SE because it can prevent crashes, so you don't lose your money in case you fly a bit closer to a tree or so. Should still be careful though, because there are no side sensors and also no upward facing sensors, so you can still crash the drone. You're not completely safe. Then smart features, there are actually a few. It has a time-lapse functionality. It has object tracking, or like it does not have object tracking yet. They say that it will be added via firmware, but the drone is already out for a while, so I think they finally should hurry up with this feature, because it's like 6 months or more since this drone is out. So I think this feature should already be there, and it is not by the time of me making this video, so take that with a grain of salt with the object tracking. And also when it comes to smart features, it has sky portrait, so basically you press a button and choose a portrait of you. And it also has automatic shooting modes, which are similar to the quick shots from DJI drones. So if it's a beginner, you might also be interested in that. And there are also a few bonus features of this drone. At first, it has audio recording from your phone. So while you fly it, you can say something and it records that into the video file, which is great for audio syncing and so on. For example, if you want to film yourself talking to the camera and fly back. It's a cool effect that I use sometimes. It's quite hard with DJI drones because I always have to like lip sync the audio manually until it looks like it fits. So with this drone, that's a bit better. And it also comes in multiple colors, which you might think it's not important, but I actually find that it's pretty good because it makes it look more like a toy when you have an orange color or so. If you have people around, generally having your drone look more like a toy can help a little bit. And of course, especially the orange color is sometimes also easier to see when it's a bit farther away, so can be an advantage sometimes. Regarding my opinion about this drone, I flew it for multiple days for my review, and I was overall pleasantly surprised. Like, it flew pretty well. Like, in a normal mode, it was a little bit too slow, I would say, but as soon as I put it in the ludicrous mode, or however they call it, it's like kind of the sports mode, it was actually quite quick. The obstacle sensors, they were a little bit annoying because they detect the obstacles a bit too early and it starts beeping, so I ended up turning them off most of the time. But it's definitely better to have them than not, because as a beginner, you obviously don't want to crash your drone, not just as a beginner, also as a professional not. And I definitely like that it has the HDR functionality because it helps you a bit to capture more dynamic range, so that's good. But my big problem with this drone is just the price still. Some commenters already said that they saw this drone on the internet for $850 somewhere, so there seem to be some better offers. But still, like when we talk about the Mavic 3 next, you will see that, especially when you compare it by price, the Autel Nano Plus loses. So in my opinion, in order to sell this drone still, they have to drop the price, and they should also bring out the firmware upgrade finally with object tracking. So that's my opinion about the Nano Plus. And let's come to the probably most exciting drone of this year, the DJI Mini 3 Pro. And the price of this drone comes in many variations. You have the $759 for the standard variation with the standard controller. It's also an even cheaper version if you already have a controller, but likely not. And then for $909, you get the Mini 3 Pro together with the DJI RC controller. It's the controller that has the screen on it. I bought this package, and this controller is awesome. If you have that money, definitely get it. You will not regret it. And if you want the fly mode combo, you have two more options. The first one is for $189 with the standard batteries, where the drone only weighs 249 grams. Or you can get it with the fly mode combo for $249, which has bigger batteries, so that you can fly longer, up to 47 minutes, I think. But the drone also weighs a bit more then, so if you want to stick to that 249 gram limit, you should not get this fly mode combo. Resolution 4K up to 60 frames per second, or in full HD up to 120 frames per second. That's really nice. And if you do photography, 48 megapixels, so you will like that. And the camera obviously has a 48 megapixel sensor, which has this quad Bayer stuff going on, so it combines the 48 megapixels to 12 megapixels to make video, and that reduces the noise a little bit, which is great. And what's also cool, what DJI added via firmware later, was 10-bit recording. So you can color grade the footage of this drone really nice, and I can confirm that. I did some tests with this footage, and color grading works really good. Then the video codecs is H.264 and H.265 as well, with up to 150 mbits. That is actually huge. Like 150 mbits, especially in H.265, gives you a lot of data to work with, also for color grading, but also if you fly really fast and close to objects, everything is really detailed, so that's good. And the DJI Mini 3 Pro also comes with a few smart features, which is Master Shots, Active Track, and Hyperlapse. Personally don't use Master Shots, but Hyperlapse is really nice to have, and Active Track as well. Like the other mini drones, they don't come with that. And aside from that, it also comes with a few bonus features, which is at first that it has vertical shooting, like you can rotate the camera around. It actually shoots vertically, no digital stuff going on. It's actually the camera that moves. And you can also tilt the camera up much higher as on other drones. Like here you can see that the camera can kind of point in between the sensors here. It's not like perfectly a 90-degree angle, but pretty high, and that allows for really interesting shots. And another bonus feature is also that it has an HDR mode, which automatically turns on if you shoot in frame rates up to 4K 30 frames per second, so that you also get a bit more detail in the shadows and the highlights at the same time. But it's not magic, it's not like a huge dynamic range effect, it just gets a little bit better. So what's my opinion about the DJI Mini 3 Pro? And I must actually say it's quite complicated. So on one side, I really love this drone. Like it's so much fun to travel with it because of the weight, obviously, but also the controller. It doesn't weigh that much despite having a screen. And the video quality is actually quite nice. It just lacks of dynamic range. It's a little bit too sharp, the video quality, but that's fixable in post. Like you can blur it a little bit and then it looks good. Color grading works good with this drone, but it's just, I want more dynamic range from my drone, and even this drone can get me despite having the HDR mode. That's why I use the bigger bad boy here, the Mini 3, the Mavic 3, sorry. So it's definitely a drone that I can recommend. The price is a little bit higher than the other mini drones, but if you can somehow afford it or save maybe for 2-3 months more, then definitely it's worth to get this drone. You will keep it for a longer time and you will enjoy it more. Also because of the sensors, it's less likely to crash it. So let's say you buy the Mini 2 and you crash it and you buy it again, then you already spend more money than on this drone, or around the same if you buy it with the DJI RC controller. So from this perspective, it also makes sense to get this one. But also no side sensors, so still be careful when you fly to the sides. And next on our list, we have the DJI Air 2 and Air 2S, which are very similar drones. Like optically, they look very similar, but there are a few differences. At first, the sensors on the DJI Air 2S are a little bit different from the Air 2. I'm not exactly sure anymore. I think these sensors are also upward sensing on the Air 2S. Like this is what I have here, the Air 2S. On the Air 2, I think the sensors are a little bit weaker, but it's not a big difference overall. And the Air 2 also has another camera as the Air 2S, so let's quickly go through the specs here. The Air 2 costs $799 currently on Amazon, or $898 for the Flymore combo. It weighs 570 grams, can shoot up to 4K resolution or 48 megapixels, again with a quad Bayer sensor. The frame rate is up to 4K 60 FPS or Full HD 240 FPS, which is quite a lot. And 4K also has the functionality to shoot HDR in up to 30 frames per second. And the HDR effect that you get on the Mavic 2 is actually a lot stronger as it is on the Mini 3 Pro or the Autel Nano Plus. But there are also some downsides to it. At first, the HDR mode of the Air 2 looks pretty artificial in my opinion, which you can solve if you color grade it a little bit with curves, like really smoothing it out in the highlights and the shadows and so on. But for a beginner, it's probably a bit too much to do all the time to really get the footage to a more natural looking level. But it's generally something that I like about this drone. And another downside of the HDR mode is that you can only use it in automatic exposure. That's also something that is not always ideal, because if you shift the drone around, it doesn't really look that cinematic anymore when the exposure changes. So it's not an ideal HDR mode, but it's definitely nice to have. And aside from that, it uses a 1/2-inch sensor, so it's also a little bit bigger as most other drones, which is nice. And it comes with 120 megabits per second in H.264 and H.265, which is also really nice, so you get a bit more data here. And it also comes with smart features such as quick shots and active track. And both drones, the Air 2 and Air 2S, also have hyperlapse features, but there's actually a little advantage of the DJI Air 2 because it can shoot hyperlapses in 48 megapixel photos or 8K, so you have more resolution there to work with, while on the Air 2S it can shoot photo time or hyperlapses with the full 20 megapixels of the sensors, which is also really good, but it's not as much as the 8K resolution. Therefore, the pixels are bigger on the Air 2S, so the overall image quality that you get when you shoot photos and hyperlapses is better on the Air 2S. I know, sounds complicated, but what you can remember from that is better image quality on the Air 2S, but more pixels on the Air 2. Let's also talk a bit more about the Air 2S, like the differences there. Like this Air 2S has a 1-inch sensor with 20 megapixels. So for photography, you get less megapixels, but because the pixel size is bigger, it looks better. You essentially have a better quality in every pixel. And for videography, it can shoot in H.264 and H.265 in 10-bit 4:0, which is really nice, with up to 150 mbits. So on the Air 2S, you can actually record the full sensor width with up to 5.4K resolution and up to 30 frames per second, which is actually a really big thing. And also when it comes to frame rates, it can record 4K and up to 60 frames per second and Full HD in 120 frames per second. So if you want to do some slow motion stuff, that's also a nice drone. And that's also why I would recommend the Air 2S over the Air 2. It has a bit less dynamic range, but therefore it's not artificial. It actually comes from the sensor and it's not like digitally created by merging different exposures. That's why this image looks a lot more natural. You have pretty clean shadows, like a little bit of noise there straight out of camera, but when you color grade it, you don't see the noise anymore. And also when it comes to the sharpness of this drone, it's not as sharp, like digitally sharp as the Air 2, what also makes the image look a bit more natural. Like generally when it comes to video, most drones over sharpen the image and then it just doesn't look that good anymore. It counts especially for the smaller drones, the Mini line, also the Autel. But on the bigger drones, that's a bit less the case. Like I would still say that the Air 2S image is a little bit too sharp, too digitally sharp, but it's not that bad anymore. And the same actually counts for the Mavic 3 later as well. But yeah, overall, I think that the Air 2S is the drone that most people should get if you don't care about the 249 grams there. Especially if you have a drone flying license in your country, I would rather go for the Air 2S than the mini drones, because obviously you get a better image quality and it is already on a pretty professional level. And it's finally time to talk about my favorite drone, the DJI Mavic 3, which also comes in like 2 versions. So let's go through the specs first. And I got the cheapest version, which cost $2,049 on Amazon. It only comes with 1 battery and no extras. And to be honest, for me, it was enough all the time right now. I sometimes wish to have a second battery so that I could shoot another hyperlapse or so after I got my video shots. But so far, just to capture my videos, 1 battery is enough. And the reason I think why many people complain about the price of the Mavic 3 is that they always look at the $4,900 version, which is the DJI Mavic 3 Cine. And to be honest, this is a lot of money, but this drone is clearly targeted towards really professional users that do a lot of commercial shoots, because there are lots of agencies and clients require ProRes recording, which is the main difference between the Cine version and the standard Mavic 3. And for most of the people watching this video, likely not as well, so go for the standard version, except you have clients that request ProRes. But there's also a version in between, the $2,849 version, the Fly More combo, which is basically the standard version, just that you get additional batteries and so on. To be honest, as mentioned before, like 1 battery for me is enough. It also has USB-C charging, so you don't need an additional charger, and that's why I went for the no Fly More combo. Another difference between the Cine version and the normal version is also 895 grams for the normal version, 899 grams for the Cine version. Not that it matters, but the rest of the specs here are actually the same. The cameras are exactly the same on both drones. A 20 megapixel sensor, micro four thirds, so the sensor is a lot bigger as the sensors of all the other drones. This is also the main advantage of this drone. Like, it gives you more dynamic range and better low light because of the sensor size. And you can also adjust the aperture while being in the air, what helps you a lot to stick to the 180-degree rule, so you get natural looking motion blur. And I actually like that a lot about this drone, because changing ND filters all the time to get a different shot is a bit annoying on the other drones. You also need ND filters sometimes on the Mavic 3, but then it's usually enough to just put an ND 16 or 32 on and do the rest via the aperture, and you get everything you need. You don't need to land it in between and change the ND filter anymore. So it's actually a good spec there. Aside from that, it also comes with the H.265 and H.264 codecs, which can record in up to 200 megabits per second, which is also a lot. And aside from that, that frame rates, you can actually shoot 5.1K and up to 50 frames per second. That's good for the European users. If you publish your videos in 25 frames per second, then you get a 2x slow-mo there. It's a bit unfortunate that you can't record in 60 frames per second and 5.1K for the Americans, but well, it is how it is. You can record in 4K 60 and 4K 120 frames per second though, which is really nice. It's actually all you need, and in full HD it even goes up to 200 frames per second. Pretty insane. It's also quite nice. The 5.1K comes in DCI, so a 17:9 aspect ratio. You get even more pixels in the width, and you also have the option to record DCI 4K if you want to. And the Mavic 3 also comes with 2 cameras actually. Like you see that here is the big bottom sensor, the Micro Four Thirds, and on top it has a smaller sensor, but with a tele lens which is 162mm, and that allows for really nice shots. The 160mm lens or camera is not really the best video quality, but it still looks pretty decent, especially with the newest firmware upgrades, and it allows for shots that are just not possible with any other drone, and I use that quite a lot. So don't underestimate this camera, even if many reviews are hating about that, especially the earlier ones. It is actually really useful and I love having it. Then we also have smart features included, of course. Master shots are also included here, active track and hyperlapse. I don't think I have to mention it again. I already mentioned it on the other drones before. But how is my experience with the DJI Mavic 3? And I would say there are like 2 sides to it. The first one is that it obviously has the very best video quality of all drones here. The dynamic range is insane. I did a comparison a few months ago with the Air 2S, and you can see it's nearly a day and night difference, and that actually matters a lot to me, because when I film sunsets or sunrises in the mountains here, it's usually when I point the DJI Air 2S into the sun that the sun looks good, but then I barely can see any details anymore in the mountains. Like, it's usually completely black. While with the DJI Mavic 3, I still have a good amount of detail in the mountains available, what makes the shot overall a lot nicer. And because it has 10-bit 4:2 with 200 mbits and therefore a really strong codec, and also this 5.1K resolution, color grading this footage is also a dream. It just works. Like, you can push the colors around however you want. But there's also the other side, which is obviously the size and weight. It is the heaviest and the biggest of all of those drones, so it's not a pocket drone anymore. Even the Air 2S, when you see that here, like, it is a huge difference. But I must also say that because the battery life is so long and it has USB-C charging, you don't have to bring an extra charger when you go on longer trips, and you also don't need additional batteries. Of course, that depends on you. If you have a client, for example, that wants you to shoot all day, then you can't have enough batteries. But for the usual user, 1 battery or a maximum 2 is enough, in my opinion. And that's why the whole package that you carry with you with the Mavic 3 is actually a little bit lighter as the whole package with the Air 2S. Because with the DJI Air 2S and Air 2, you usually want to carry 3 batteries with you. I mean, 2 would usually also be enough, but better to take 3 there. And that plus the charger adds a bit of weight to your bag. So overall, you actually have less weight in your bag when you travel with the Mavic 3 and only 1 battery, and you use the charger from your MacBook or whatever you have with you. And this is actually how I travel with this drone. So basically, if you want to decide between the Air 2S and the Mavic 3, it's like, how important is video quality for you, and how long do you shoot? Like, do you need 1 battery, or do you need 2 or even more batteries? And if you only need 1, then the Mavic 3 is actually the more travel-friendly drone, even if it doesn't look like that. That was also like the decision-making factor for me. The USB-C charging really changes a lot there. But yeah, that's my opinion about the DJI Mavic 3. Let's now come to my actual recommendations in each category. And by the way, if you enjoyed this video so far and you want to support my channel and learn a bit more about videography in general, then check my Learn with Pascal courses. Learn with Pascal is my online school with 7 courses where I teach you all aspects of videography. So that's a very easy and quick way to learn more about that. I will leave the links to that in the description below, so check them out and I see you there. Now, giving actual recommendations is actually not easy because it really depends on your individual case, but let's try to do it here. So let's start with the entry level, and there's obviously the Mini SE, the Mini 2, the Autel Nano Plus, and the Mini 3 Pro, and because it's $800 maximum, I will only use the Mini 3 Pro with the standard controller here for $59 in that bracket. My recommendation here is that if you already shoot videos and you want to use your drone to add a different perspective to it and to make your videos a bit more interesting, that if you can somehow afford it, go for the DJI Mini 3 Pro, because this drone just has a video quality that actually is not that far away anymore from the DJI Air 2S. So you're already on a really good level. It's really travel friendly, and you get rid of all of the restrictions, and it's also not that expensive. So this is, I think, a drone that you will be really happy with for a long time. Plus, it's also less likely that you crash it with all the sensors. So that's my recommendation there. But if you really can't afford it, if you also can't afford it in 2 or 3 months, if you save a bit more money or so, then the Mini 2 is also perfectly fine. Of course, you don't get the sensors there, no object tracking, nothing like that. But it still allows you to get a different perspective and make your videos a bit better, and you also have 4K. Another case is if you don't shoot videos yet and you probably never flew a drone before, and you just think that drone flying could be something fun and you just want to do it for your hobby, or maybe also to have a few memories from your upcoming travel trip or so, then I would suggest to get the Mini SE, because in that case you don't need the very best picture quality that you can color grade or so. You just want to have fun flying your drone without many restrictions, and you also probably don't want to spend that much money on it. And I think for that the Mini SE is perfect. And don't get me wrong here, like the image quality of the Mini SE is not bad. It's just that you can't do much with it and when it comes to color grading or so. But just for capturing your holiday or so, it still looks good enough. Like the drones that I used at first when I started out, like Phantom 3 Standard was it in my case, the image quality of this drone, I would say, was worse than what you get with the Mini SE. So think about that. In that case, it's perfectly fine to go for this one. Now, you might also ask yourself, what about the Autel? As I kind of mentioned before already, I can't recommend it here because the Mavic 3 is priced a little bit below it at $759, and it's, in my opinion, the better drone. The only reason why you might want to get the Autel Nano Plus, in my opinion, is because to get around certain flight restrictions in certain areas, because Autel Nano Plus doesn't have that many. It's like better sometimes for real estate photography or so, if you can't fly around houses, for example. But aside from that, I really don't see a reason why you want to get this drone. And if you now think that I'm biased towards DJI or I'm sponsored or so, I am not. And actually, the only drone on this table that I got for free is the Autel Nano Plus. So just because I get something for free does not mean that I'm biased towards it or that I lie to you guys. Maybe Autel will not send me anything ever again because of this video, I don't know, but that's just what I have to risk, because I'm not lying here to my audience. But of course, if someone from Autel sees this video, I'm always open for new reviews. And I think it's really important to have companies like Autel on the market, because competition is always good for us consumers. So much for the entry-level market here, but let's also now talk about the mid-range. And the drones in the mid-range, there's obviously the DJI Air 2S and Air 2, but I would also put the DJI Mini 3 Pro in that mid-range market, especially with the controller, with the screen controller, the DJI RC, because mid-range market doesn't necessarily mean that the drone must be heavier or so. It just means that you want to have a decent image quality and you are willing to spend a bit more money on it. And I think the Mini 3 perfectly lives up to that. As mentioned before, in the entry-level market already, the Mini 3 Pro's quality is not that far away anymore from the DJI Air 2S, so you might be really happy with this drone. It's easy to travel with it, you have less restrictions and so on. So the Mini 3 is a drone that I can recommend if you're looking for a mid-range drone, but you want to travel really light and you want to get around certain restrictions. But aside from that, for most people, I would clearly recommend the DJI Air 2S in the mid-range market, because this is a drone that is already on a more professional level with its features. It flies really, really well. It is also really travel friendly. It is not too big, and you can do a lot with it. And I must also say that making a drone license is actually not that hard. It usually takes you 1 or 2 hours, and you get the best image quality that you can get somewhere around the $1,000 area. So just go for this drone in that case and spend a bit of time and make a drone license in your country, and it's fine. Especially if you travel here in Asia, like in most places, the people don't really care about flying your drone anyway. It depends, of course. Like, don't do anything bad with your drones. Like, follow all the safety guidelines, stay away from airports and the military and so on, and then it's fine. And yeah, that's why I think DJI Air 2S in that price range is definitely the drone that you should mostly look into. And let's come to the pro market, and as you see, there's basically only the Mavic 3 left, so the decision is basically between the Mavic 3 and the Mavic 3 Cine. And let's be honest, most people watching this video would not get the Cine version. It's just too expensive, so you get the Mavic 3. Now you might ask yourself, what about the Mavic 2 Pro? What about the Autel drones in that price range? Clearly, the Mavic 2 Pro, in my opinion, is just outdated. Even the Air 2S is, in my opinion, better than the Mavic 2 Pro. The only disadvantage, as mentioned before, is the lack of aperture control, but it's not a big issue, especially because the image quality with the 5K and so on is better on the Air 2S. And when it comes to the Autel drones, like, look, we have a Micro Four Thirds sensor here on the Mavic 3, while even the Autel Evo Pro, I think it is, a $2,500 drone from Autel, only comes with a 1-inch sensor, and it's just hard to compete against the Mavic 3 then. And that's why also here I would say you only really want to look into the Autel drones then if you really need to get rid of certain restrictions that you have, like geo restrictions with your drone for certain jobs. But aside from that, like quality-wise, the Mavic 3 will be the better drone, and it's also a bit about resale value overall. For example, I'm selling the Nano Plus right now, and it's really hard to find someone that wants to buy it because no one knows Autel here, while DJI drones are always really easy to sell, so your resale value later might also be better. So that's why the only drone that I can really recommend in the Pro bracket is the Mavic 3. Maybe you're also looking into the Phantom 4 Pro, but to be honest, this drone is much bigger. It also only has a 1-inch sensor, and it doesn't even have 10 bits. I was actually not that happy with the Phantom 4 Pro before, so do yourself a favor in that bracket and just get the Mavic 3. You won't regret it. And if you're also not sure if you should get the Mavic 3 or the DJI Air 2S, I made another video about where I compare both drones, so check that out here in the corner. Aside from that, I hope that this video was helpful for you to finding the right drone. If yes, then please leave me a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing for upcoming videography tutorials. See you.